Hello friends! Today we're going to talk about consequences. Consequences take many forms in a de-escalation context, and different people call them different things, from limits to boundaries to outcomes. But at the end of the day, we're all talking about the same thing. Once I've given you your options, I also have to tell you about what happens for each option. A lot of weight is given to the options consequences sequence, and it's extremely useful for outlining the limits of your power, as well as for incentivizing an appropriate course of action for the escalated person. However, there are some pitfalls to improperly introducing consequences, and I want to cover those, as well as some tips for how to do it well. The first issue that we commonly come across is accidentally issuing threats, or possibly intentionally issuing threats, because the de-escalator is one of those people who believes that behavior suppression is a valid de-escalation strategy. It isn't. Oftentimes, this happens because the de-escalator is trying to establish their authority with the escalated person, and so they frame the consequences as what I can do for you, or what I will do to you, instead of as the inevitable consequence of the choice that the escalated person might make. Part of this is failure to divorce your ego from your response, common in new de-escalators, but part of it's just the framing. There's a reason why bad cop is so effective as a strategy, and it's because it depersonalizes you from the consequences. Put a pin in that. I'm going to circle back to bad cop. I can say, if you yell at me again, you're grounded, and that checks all the bad boxes. It ham-fistedly establishes my authority, it disproportionately punishes a choice that affects my feelings rather than my safety, and the consequence has no logical relation to the choice at hand. If you lower your voice, I can understand you better, is much more reasonable. It checks all of the good boxes, puts the power in the hands of the escalated person, provides them with something that they want, and does not create a power struggle. But Sharon, I hear you there in the back thinking what you're thinking. But Sharon, that's not a punishment. How can this possibly be an effective strategy when there's no actual consequences? Well, buckle up, because I'm about to define some terms for you. A consequence is colloquially synonymous with punishment, and that's a real shame because it deprives us of the real value of the word, which is to imply inevitability. And for the record, the word consequence is so much better a way to imply inevitability than is the word should, which is a garbage word that has no place in any problem-solving conversation of any kind because it oversimplifies the issue, it doesn't account for human error, and don't get me started on the word just. A consequence is the result. It's the effect. It happens without intention and without action. The consequence isn't your fault. It's the natural result of actions taken by the escalated person, not something that you inflict upon them. When you outline a punishment instead of a consequence, you're threatening. If you don't do what I want you to do, then you will get this bad outcome that I have the power to enforce. In healthcare, the one that I see, unfortunately, thrown about with alarming frequency is, you cut that out or you're going in restraints. This is a threat, no question about it. Does it de-escalate the situation? No. Does it build rapport with the escalated person? No. Does it help your case in any way? No. It's the de-escalator trying to create the impression of authority when all they have is power. And even if it looks like it works, that's because the behavior has been suppressed, not because the situation is de-escalated. The same behavior will come back later once there is someone new to bargain with. You can avoid this by keeping the consequence causally linked to the behavior. You can't always do this in one step, and that's fine. As long as you outline the entire chain, you're in good shape. I once had a gal on a DCR hold who didn't want to change into a patient gown, and when I asked her why not, she said, I just want to go home. So I'm like, great, that is a goal we can work together on. So I explained the whole process to her in reverse. So before you can go home, the DCR has to talk to you and make sure that that's a safe option. Before the DCR can be called, the social worker has to talk to you to make sure there aren't any resources they can provide you with that might help. Before the social worker can talk to you, the doctor has to make sure there isn't anything physical or medical that might be troubling you. And before the doctor can come see you, security has to screen your belongings to make sure that there's nothing that might be harmful to you or to anyone else who comes in here. Before that can happen, you have to be wearing a gown. Those are the rules. So if you want to go home, and again, I think that's a great goal, you have to change into a gown. If you can set up the conversation so that their behavior is the thing preventing them from reaching their own goal, then you can make great strides in de-escalation just by outlining the consequences for the choice that will get them what they want. Another way that you can avoid threatening the escalated person is by introducing more than one consequence. Up until now, I've only brought up consequences as a one-time deal, but you can introduce a whole string of consequences for the foreseeable choices that the escalated person might make. If you lower your voice, I can understand you better, and we can talk about you going to Casey's party this weekend. If you can't moderate your volume, then I'm concerned that you aren't mature enough to be going to parties, and I'll have to say no and schedule a full roster of family activities this weekend instead. Note: I don't have kids, much less teenagers, and my experience with managing their behavior has been in the context of friends who do, or in a hospital setting where I was intrinsically seen as an authority figure / cool adult who understands. I've had nothing but success, but I know that there's a subset of people out there who genuinely believe that if you don't have kids, you have no idea how it is. And if you're out there, hi! I can't change your mind if that's your view. So do hit the comments and tell me how you introduce consequences with your kids. I and others can certainly benefit from your experience. So thank you in advance for sharing that with us. And remember, always, always, always accept their choice and act upon it. Do not second guess them. Do not try to convince them to choose something else. The whole point of giving them a choice in the first place was to support their autonomy, because feelings of helplessness and disempowerment are big features in escalated behaviors, and giving them some control over the outcome of this conversation goes a long way. When you override the choice that the escalated person has made, you didn't actually give them a choice. You gave them an ultimatum dressed like a choice, and recovering your rapport is going to be extremely difficult because you've just explicitly shown them that you cannot be trusted to mean what you say. Now, how to introduce consequences appropriately. In most situations, I want to illustrate the positive consequence first, or perhaps only the positive consequences. This creates a situation where the escalated person is being shown very clearly how they can affect their own circumstances, and they have much less reason to lash out at you, the de-escalator, when you're not the thing keeping them on this course of action. They are. It shows that you're trying to help. Make sure that all consequences are causally linked to the behavior. And now we're going to pull that pin out of bad cop and take a look at that, because creating a bad cop can be incredibly helpful for keeping the choice and the consequence linked. I'm sure many of you have already spotted the problems with keeping that link, especially when the natural consequences of a choice don't relate directly to the choice. I mean, if you speed and then you get a ticket, that's not exactly capital R rational. Nothing about driving over the posted limit results in giving someone money except for the ticket. The reason that those things are linked is because of the existence of the bad cop. Note, the bad cop can be a person, but usually it isn't. Usually bad cop is the rules. Remember my example from earlier with the patient who didn't want to change? The reason that all of those outlined consequences are valid is because that's the procedure. Those consequences are outlined by a rule set that predates my interaction with the patient and is applied to all patients equally. And this lets me depersonalize the consequence. It's not that I won't let you go home. It's that the rules say that I can't let you go home. It's not me, it's the rules. I'm just as helpless in this situation as you are, but I can share my understanding of the rules with you so that together we can work on your goals within that system. Teaming also, episode for another time. When you create a bad cop, it needs to be an inexorable force of nature. Maybe I made the rules because apparently today is the day that we use parenting as an example, and that's just how it is. If I made the rules, then I need to make sure that the people who live under those rules know what they are and they know what the consequences will be. When I was a kid, if you didn't do your chore one day, the consequence was that the rotation was set back and you would also have it the next day. And that's the story of how I ended up on dish duty for 6 months. Because the consequence was outlined in the rules, it didn't need to be directly related to the choices. The choice has already been placed within the context of the rules. Now, this is one of those things that requires groundwork. The rules need to be established ahead of time, otherwise it's just you being arbitrary and we're back at ultimatums. If you want to make bad cop a person, that's okay too, but that person needs to be someone who can leave the situation entirely, because as far as the escalated person goes, they will always be the bad cop. In the hospital, we use security for this. We, security, would show up, explain the rules, outline the consequences for breaking those rules, and then thank them for their time. This leaves the primary nurse free to preserve their rapport and say, well, I guess there's nothing we can do. Rules are the rules, so how can we make this better another way? If the bad cop can't leave because you need another person for safety, or because you made the other parent bad cop, or because bad cop is someone who they see on a regular basis, like a religious figure or a teacher, then that person's rapport is forever damaged because their role in the escalated person's life has been to oppose their wants. That is not a great situation to put someone in, so if you make a person bad cop, make sure they can leave. I just have a bullet point here that says conclusion, so... And that's introducing consequences in de-escalation. Let me know what you think in the comments. Have you successfully introduced consequences? Have you had consequences backfire? Do you use a bad cop when you introduce those consequences? Put your stories, additions, or corrections in the comments, and I will talk about them next time. Be smart, stay safe. Bye.